School of Public Health. I'm Dr. Megan Ranney. I'm a practicing emergency physician, professor of emergency medicine, and academic dean for the School of Public Health. And I'm honored to serve as the moderator for this evening's panel. I'm thrilled that we have representatives tonight from all facets of education, ranging from teachers to students, to administrators, to parents. Tonight's discussion format is going to cover a number of broad topics with questions being asked of the specific panelists. I'll also, of course, try to have a little discussion between them because they have really interesting and complementary perspectives on school return and this balancing between health and equity that we're all struggling with right now. Not all panelists are going to answer each question, but as I've already said to the panelists, certainly they can all feel free to jump in. So I'm going to start by introducing our amazing panelists, and then we'll launch into some slides and questions. I will say that at the end, we are saving time for audience Q&A, and I'll say a little more about that after I introduce our panelists. So let me start with Principal Cynthia Torres. She currently leads the Reservoir Avenue School, where her work has focused on coaching teachers and creating strong partnerships with parents and community. She strongly believes that relationships are the basis of a strong school culture and is committed to educational equity for all students. Next, Tony Cox. Tony is a 9th grade biology teacher in Providence Public Schools and a former graduate of the Masters of Arts in Teaching program at Brown University. Tony, welcome. Next is Deborah Obisagna, a current student at Classical High School in Providence. She immigrated to the US from Nigeria in 2020 and has called Rhode Island home ever since. She wants to major in neuroscience or public health and either research diseases or become a physician. Deborah, we can't wait to have you join us here someday. Next, Melissa Hughes. She's the mother of 2 Providence Public School students. She's an active member of the parent-teacher organization at her children's school, volunteers as a parent representative on the Providence School Building Committee, has served for over 4 years on the leadership team of the district's Parent Advisory Council, currently is the middle school leader, and also works closely with the independent nonprofit organization, Parents Leading for Educational Equity. Next, Angelica Infante Green, whom most of you know, began her career as a public school teacher. She was in the inaugural cohort of Chiefs of Change, which prepares leaders for the complex job of leading state and large urban school systems. She served the city and state of New York in many roles, including Deputy Commissioner of the Office of Instructional Support. In March of 2019, just a year prior to the pandemic hitting, Angelica was named Rhode Island's Commissioner of Elementary and Secondary Education. Over the last couple of years, she's led some difficult decisions, including a state takeover of the Providence Public School District, and of course, helped us all reopen as public schools last September. Finally, Dr. Elizabeth Goldberg. She is an associate professor of emergency medicine, colleague of mine in the emergency departments at Rhode Island and the Miriam Hospital, as well as associate professor of health services, policy, and practice. She's a board certified emergency physician and researcher. She also serves on the Providence School Committee. And I should finally say that I myself am a parent of 2 public school students. And so this discussion is one that holds immense import to me, not just as a public health researcher, but also as a parent. So with that, let me go into our first slide. I will say for those who are just joining, we have a Q&A. So welcome you guys to put questions in. We have about 5 slides and a series of questions to go through. And then at the end, I will be able to take some of the audience questions through Q&A. So feel free to put those in throughout the next hour and a half or so. We'll be having panelist discussions for about the first hour, and then we'll take the last 20 to 30 minutes, hopefully, for audience questions. So let me start with kind of where we are right now, Omicron and the state of COVID. So as you are all eminently familiar from watching the news, Omicron, which was discovered right around Thanksgiving, is the most transmissible variant of COVID that we have seen yet. Based on the data that we have so far, we think that Omicron is somewhere between 2 and 4 times more transmissible than prior variants of COVID. And unfortunately, it does evade some of the immunity that's created either by vaccines or by prior infections. So able to break through those defenses that our bodies naturally have. Rhode Island is currently #1 in per capita infections of COVID-19. Despite the fact that this new variant is much more transmissible, and despite the fact that it does evade some immunity from vaccines, vaccinations, especially when combined with boosters, are still remarkably effective, both at preventing infections, period, but more importantly, from my perspective as a physician, very effective at preventing infections from developing into severe illness. So when I say severe illness, I mean things that require a hospital visit, hospital stay, intensive care unit, or God forbid, death. Nonetheless, because of this huge spike in cases, we are of course seeing an increased demand for ambulatory care, increased demand for emergency department services, and increased absences across every part of society, including schools. And as we all know well, schools are currently facing significant student absences, staff shortages, and labor disputes, along with rapidly rising coronavirus cases. So with that as background about Omicron, I'm going to move us on to some questions and answers. All right, so you guys should be able to see all of us as panelists now. So this is obviously the third school year since the pandemic began. I'm a parent of a 4th grader and a 7th grader. I know that to my 4th grader, this is to him in many ways the way that school is. We've faced a number of promises and challenges, ranging from vaccines becoming available to our teachers and then our students, to new test to stay protocols, and of course, this new variant. Less than 2 weeks ago, Rhode implemented new protocols and mandates that were aligned with the newly revised CDC guidelines and the National Education Association. In parallel, our Rhode Island Teachers Union called for a shift to remote learning. Dean Ashish Jha, who I work under, recently tweeted that given the immense value of in-person schooling for America's kids, let's talk about how every school can be in person safely today, not under ideal conditions, but under real world conditions. And that's what I hope to dig into a little bit in this first section, is how we do that. So I'm going to start out actually with a question for Deborah. So Deborah, if you don't mind to lead us off, can you tell us a little bit about the current real world conditions facing students and how this has affected you and your peers over the last couple of years?
Yes, so basically I think everybody in the Providence School Department, if you're like maybe above 6th grade and higher, can remember the minute when they announced on the announcements that we were going full distance learning. It was like March 13th. Some of us already knew because it went on the news first. And then I do remember all our teachers saying it was only going to be 2 weeks. And even like people on the news were like, it's only going to be 2 weeks, you know, like you're just going to be in your house for a while. And then it just like slowly got worse. So for some of my friends, I know their mental health really like declined sharply, and it reflects on their grades too. So there are a lot of people who did not do well the first like quarantine distance learning, and then it just kept getting worse because then we had asynchronous learning. I go to PPSD, where some people, you go to school one day and then other days you were in home, and it was really difficult to learn sometimes because some teachers were just like splitting the coursework in half. So by the end of the year, you kind of only learned half of the stuff. And then this year, senior year, we're all back together in the building. But because of teachers being out for COVID and a lot of kids having to like quarantine, there's also like a gap in learning. So for me, I sometimes I feel like in the past 2 years, I haven't learned anything, but there's some like other like benefits, because even though we were like in our houses, I saw a talk about it, about how like being in your house away from society and societal pressures allowed people to like explore themselves better. So most people came out of quarantine with a new sense of identity because they were away from like the pressures that you would get from being in a consistent classroom environment. And some people really found like what type of learner they are and how to like thrive as a person. So there's like two sides to it.
Thank you for sharing that. And I think you illustrate this tension so perfect, that many of us are feeling, that there were some advantages to DL for some students. And at the same time, especially in those early days, there was tremendous upheaval. Thank you for sharing, Deborah. And I'm glad that your friends are doing okay right now for the most part. Tony, a question for you. Tell us about the real world conditions that you're facing as a teacher. And in particular, I'd love to hear a little about what it's been like to try to provide routine and some normalcy for your students, kind of reflecting on Deborah's comments there as we enter our third year of this pandemic.
Yes, just want to start off, I am only one teacher, so the things that I have to say are definitely only from my context in my school. I kind of just want to talk you through the morning in a scenario of kind of what I have to deal with, because I think that might provide kind of a clearer picture. So in the morning, kind of classic teacher things upon preparing my room. In addition to doing that, there's the wiping down tables, turning on the HEPA filter. But once the school day actually starts, my first period class typically starts with 1 to 2 students. And by the end of the period, it'll only be around 8 to 10. So we're often at 40% to 50% attendance. And that can be due to a lot of different reasons, and kind of echoing what Deborah was talking about. Some different scenarios that might happen during that morning as I'm teaching my lesson is I might have a student in the room who I haven't seen in 3 weeks, and I don't really know the context with that. So in my head, I'm going, okay, I need to make sure they have an in the lesson. And then if I have a quiz that day, I have to make a decision in that moment, do I give them work to catch up, or do I have that quiz? So kind of this balancing out of figuring out where they're at, but also kind of moving forward. On the other hand, I might notice a student who is absent, and maybe it's their 4th day. So in my head, I'm going through, I need to contact home, maybe other students, guidance counselors, to kind of figure out to catch it early so I can get into contact with them. And then there's scenarios where we're getting emails from guidance counselors telling us that students may be out for a few weeks. And so at that point, I have to think about how can I make an online learning opportunity to equivalent, or also keep them on track while they're out of school, but also be there for my students in the room. So really it's a large balancing act, and each student has their own experience. But as a teacher, there's a lot of balance because I kind of have to see where everyone's at. And it's kind of difficult. I think the question touches on of providing normalcy. It is its own normalcy in terms of the routine of me being there and kind of keeping consistency, making sure there's access to materials in the room at all times. But also when you're only operating at 40% attendance, it's difficult to make sure everybody is up to date.
Thank you. And a huge thank you to you and to the other teachers. And I know we're going to get to the administrators, but just really appreciative of your flexibility and your dedication to the kids that comes through in the way you talk about it. I'm going to now go to Melissa. I'm going to ask you a question as a parent. So I know that many of the folks listening today are likely parents, but I'd love to hear, if you could walk us through, what was it like to send your kids back to school post-holiday break, and honestly making this decision to send our kids back every day as the number of COVID cases has risen in Rhode Island? And then a related question is, I'd asked Deborah about her experience as a student. I'd love to hear about your experience as a parent, about the impact that the COVID changes to education have had on you and your family.
Thanks so much. I would say for returning after this most recent holiday break, definitely there was lots of buzz in the news about how steeply the cases were increasing in Rhode Island. And I think maybe as a parent, I felt that there was a little bit of a mixed message happening where I felt alarmed by the number of cases, but it didn't, if I may say, it didn't necessarily seem like restrictions were being put in place across the board, not necessarily for schools, but for businesses, for gatherings, for masking, et cetera. It felt like those were not changing as much. So it felt different than previous returns to school, where there didn't seem to be that same balance. As a parent, luckily for my family, I have 2 middle schoolers right now, both of whom were fully vaccinated before the holiday break. My youngest had just received her 2nd vaccine, and anecdotally, many of her classmates in her cohort had. My 8th grade son, it was a little bit trickier of a decision for us because he has asthma and some other health concerns. And so we were worried about whether or not this current variant and outbreak would be, if that would change. We felt at our school, again, kind of like Tony said, I do talk with lots of other parents through my work, but speaking from my own experience, we felt pretty comfortable that our school had a good handle on the layered mitigation protocols, that students and staff were masking well. We have good ventilation in our building, along with the freestanding air purifiers. And we do have weekly surveillance testing happening, which is an opt-in. We've heard from some parents that they would like that to be not optional. They'd prefer an opt-out, while other parents have said that they would absolutely not like that. So we felt pretty comfortable. I think PPSD did a good job with the staggered start from the perspective of COVID mitigation. I do think it allowed for a little more rapid testing as students rolled back in. Practically speaking, in our house, that meant that my daughter went back to school on Monday and my son didn't go back in person until Wednesday. So there was some grumbling at the dinner table about that. And I think from talking with other families, I think families wished that they had a little more notice, that maybe there had been decisions made. Obviously, information's always changing, but I think there was a lot of shuffling, especially for families with younger children in elementary school, that maybe all of a sudden realized, oh no, I just took time off at the holidays to be with my family, and now I don't have any more days off from work. And what am I going to do if my kid's not in school? So I think it really varies family to family, but for our family, the reentry was smooth. There were some cases identified in both my daughter and my son's classes, which was a little bit scary, but so far we've been able. And can you please repeat that second question? I apologize.
Honestly, you got to it. You talked about the impact on your family.
Okay.
You did. Melissa, you were
Okay.
awesome.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. And I do, I do think that that's an important thing that both you and Tony and Deborah have all acknowledged, that, these are one person's perspectives, and that there are a million of us in Rhode Island, and every parent is going to have a slightly different experience. So I'm going to start to take it out from.
Can I add one more thing? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
The other thing I wanted to add is that I know that in Providence that the vaccination rates vary a lot from community to community and school to school. There, for example, some high schools where the vaccination rate is in like the 20s or 30%, and others that are closer to 70 or 80%. And so I think that every family's experience is so different based on their own feelings or situations around vaccines and access to good information on that, as well as how comfortable they are sending their own students back to school. So it's very complicated, and it's complicated for the teachers as well.
And we're also tired of things being complicated at this point. And I do recognize that's part of it too, which then allows me to take it a little bit from the individual perspective up towards the administrator. So Principal Torres, I'm actually going to go to you next and ask about your experience as a school leader, right? So you're responsible for the students, for the parents, for the teachers, for the support staff. Talk to us a little about what it's like right now as a school administrator.
Like Deborah and Tony spoke about, it's a balancing act. We have always worn many hats, but now really many hats. I think that our role has shifted. We need to make sure that we not only secure to our families, our students, our staff, that they're safe in the school. So that is our most important job right now, maintaining everybody safe, but also provide with the best education possible to all our students, because we see that there has been learning loss, and how are we going to support our students emotionally? So it's like I call it, at Reservoir Avenue, it's all hands on deck. You can see I'm very lucky to have an assistant principal, and you can see us having many hats, from assistant coaching teachers to cleaning tables in the cafeteria, because we don't have the personnel on that day, and we want to make sure that everything is okay. So it is a wide range of jobs. I like how you address the real world conditions. We know that this is not optimum, but we do know that we have a compromise with our children, with our family, and we will do everything we have to do in order to meet the needs of all our students.
Thank you, Principal. I appreciate that. I'll say one of my dearest college friends is a principal of a public school in Boston, and we have regular conversations about this struggle that she's having, where for many of her kids, being in school is where they need to be. And at the same time, you know, there are other kids for whom being in school is really difficult right now, and you're balancing the whole community. So I very much appreciate your leadership and commitment to your school family.
I would also like to add, it's been a great experience in the midst of all this, because the perseverance of our teachers, of our students, and our families come afloat every single day. And that's something that we need to honor every day.
Thank you. Commissioner, you knew I was going to get to you eventually. So I'd love to hear your thoughts about the current real world, you know, certainly the real world conditions of our Providence public schools, but also on a larger level, how the Rhode Island Department of Education is supporting our school districts across the state. And then I have a follow-up question that I know is on every parent's mind. So
I'm sure I know the question. So this is very complicated, as we all know. But I will say that I am proud of our teachers, our administrators, our parents, our students throughout the state of Rhode Island, because we have managed to come back and create a sense of whatever normal is now for our students. But these decisions are really hard, and they're and you know, when I was listening to Melissa Hughes talk about, you know, parents need time to plan, and they do. Our problem is that we're dependent on the CDC. They put out their information like 3 days before school start. You know, so it's always this kind of very fluid decision-making process, and acknowledging the real work that happens in the classrooms and with the families, and the role that we know that schools play for students. And we saw last year from the data, because we were one of the states that did administer our assessment, our kids were heavily impacted by the pandemic. So there's the academic, but then there's the social emotional, and there's the other bigger role that schools play in communities and urban settings and in all sorts of settings. So I have to say that when I was hearing Tony talk in Providence, the attendance rate across the district is 70% for the students, and then it's 80% for the teachers. Staffing has become a very difficult issue for us across the entire state, because we're out in quarantine, coming in, what do we do? And our job at Rhode is to provide the supports to districts to be able to provide the in-person. And I know that everybody has a different opinion about that, but we are trying really hard to follow the science and mitigate. I think our challenge is that we provide the mitigations in school, but once our students and everybody leaves the school settings, things are very different. And throughout the state of Rhode Island, the vaccination rate for our students differs widely. Barrington, who are one of our most highest affluent districts, and East Greenwich have the highest vaccination rates in the state for our students, where you have Providence, Central Falls that has, and Woonsocket, some of the lowest. And I think it's really figuring out how we do a better job of communicating the value and the importance. So our jobs have changed. You know, I'm not a public health official, but I've sort of am in that quasi role where I know about air filtration, and just who we are as an organization has just changed. And it is not easy, and it changes day by day. But the one thing that we have remained very steady is on following the data and the science. And that's how we are leading and making sure that we communicate as best as we can and provide support. Our teachers have been doing and continue to do yeoman's work every single day. But our students statewide have been very clear with us that distance learning has been really hard. Even the highest achieving students have felt that they have felt like they've lost a year or they've lost a gap. And our youngest students, that this is all they know. That's very hard as well. So I don't know if I answered the question well, but this is the reality. The reality is that we are juggling many balls and working in partnership with our Department of Health to try to make schools the safest as well as the most normalized setting. And for most of our kids, this is where they eat. This is where they get their food. This is where they get their support system. This is where they get to see a nurse. So I think we take for granted how important schools are in the everyday lives of our kids, especially in the urban sector.
I appreciate that. And I do want to be super explicit to those that are listening that the science is constantly changing. So I appreciate you're following the science, but the reality is that we as scientists were arguing about the recommendations over the entire holiday break. And in fact, the K through 12 recommendations didn't formally get changed until, as you said, like 2 days before school started. And you're doing your best to follow what the CDC tells you, while also not being a public health specialist yourself. And even those of us in public health are debating some of these things. But there are some clear mitigation measures. Vaccines, masks, ventilation, and testing when we can get it make a huge difference. And correct me if I'm wrong, and this is not kind of in our moderator script, but last year, our infection rates among students that were in purely distance learning versus in person were approximately the same, correct?
No, they were actually higher. So the kids in distance learning had higher infection rates than in person, because the part that people forget, there is mitigation in the school. And where we found that there was spread is in the social settings, when kids were getting together after school, or sports. Hockey was like a big super spreader for us in Rhode Island. So those were where we were able to get the data prior to a vaccine, right? This is the data that we were using prior to having an additional mitigation strategy.
Thank you. So that leads to my next question to you, which is, do you think there's a possibility of us going back to distance or remote learning? I'll say, personally, as a public health professional, before school restarted, I said to my kids, and I'm going to put my own opinion here, is like, there's a chance that there's going to be a lot of teachers sick and that you guys are going to have to be remote. And my fourth grader started crying and was like, Mom, we're not shutting down again. And I was like, buddy, if it happens, my bet is that it's going to be for a couple of weeks until we get through the surge. But obviously I'm not a school administrator and I have no say in the way that schools work. So I'm curious on your perspective on, that was my best guess from my public health perspective rather than from an educator's perspective. So I'd be interested in yours.
Yeah, I also have a 6th and a 7th grader. And if they hear the word distance learning, they start crying. So I get it. So I went to my board last Tuesday to actually get permission to allow districts to go distance. So for example, in Providence, if a child is quarantined, they're supposed to receive distance learning instruction. If they're in isolation, they're supposed to receive distance learning instruction, but not across the board, not like what we did last year where we were all full distance learning. I think when you said, for a week, for a few days, those things may happen. And we have done it in very isolated settings. So for example, in Providence, we went distance learning only in high school because we did not have the staff. So we knew the school couldn't function. And I think it was 3 days. And then there's a school in Barrington, for example, that had to go distance learning for 2 days. But it's more of that than the continuous all-state distance learning. And I think it's going to be more of a case by case. And we had schools that decided to use their staff. For example, there was a school in Providence, in middle school, that we kept the 6th graders in person because they needed to be in person. And we went remote for a few days for the 7th and 8th graders that could be at home. So they're very nuanced decisions, but for very short periods of time. That is to say, that's where we are today. I don't know where we will be a week from now. I don't know where we will be 2 weeks from now. I am lucky enough to be, well, I don't know if I'm lucky enough, but I am in all the conversations with the Department of Health, and where those debates happen, where this push and pull and the reality of how it gets carried out on the ground happens. And right now, we feel that this is the best place and scenario for our kids. Our mental health issues have quadrupled, not doubled in the last year. Kids that have never experienced the isolation, the depression is where we are. And I have the privilege of meeting with kids statewide every 3 weeks, and I hear it from them. And I think we are going to be very fluid, and we will follow the data, we will follow the science, and we will make sure that it is nuanced. That's all I can say for today.
Thank you. And I'm sorry if I put you on the spot, because I do understand that the situation keeps changing. So, Liz, I'm going to go to you both as a parent and as a, involved with Providence schools and as a physician to talk a little bit about vaccination, which everybody's mentioned. Obviously, vaccinations are not required right now, either in Providence schools or anywhere across the state, but are strongly encouraged. And I'd love to hear your thoughts about both increasing the vaccination rates among our students and teachers or support staff, and whether or not you see this being mandated at some point in the future.
Right. Well, first, thank you for having me. And it's really wonderful to have the teacher perspective and parent perspective and perspective of administrators. I will say that in order for all of our communities to be safe, and especially our school community safe, almost everyone needs to be vaccinated. And so from the perspective of a physician, as a parent, as a school board member, I'm in strong support of vaccine mandates for both teachers and kids for that reason. I will say that as a public entity, there's a lot of different perspectives that need to be drawn into this. And the approach that we have taken thus far has been really educating surrounding vaccination, offering vaccination in school clinics, providing teachers with opportunities to get vaccinated first, ensuring that people get boosted. And I think there is more need for culturally appropriate and linguistically appropriate education and outreach. And I think that needs to be enhanced, because at this point, we have allowed the people that have wanted to get vaccinated the access to get vaccinated. So it's no longer the access problem that we had initially. It's much more a problem of are people feeling trust in the entities that are recommending vaccination? Are they feeling like, as parents, it's okay for my kid to get vaccinated because it's safe? I will say, as a parent, my children that are eligible are all vaccinated. We've had millions of children vaccinated at this point throughout the United States, and it is a safe and effective vaccine. And so I would like to see us move towards mandatory vaccination in the schools. But I think that will need to have the buy-in from our state leaders, from the Rhode Island Department of Health, from our parents, from our teachers, and we have some work to do there.
Thank you. And I will, of course, highlight that there are many vaccines that are required to come to school. So thank you very much for that perspective. I'm going to move us on to the second topic. And I will say I'm seeing in the Q&A a bunch of questions that actually relate to this. So not ignoring your questions, we're actually going to get to them. So I kind of alluded to this with my question to the commissioner, but this is a message from Acting Assistant Secretary for Civil Rights, Suzanne B. Goldberg, that she put at the beginning of a report from the U.S. Department of Education that was released last summer. The title of the report, for those who are interested, is Education in a Pandemic, the Disparate Impacts of COVID-19 on America's Students. I'll read it out loud. It says, this report bears witness to the many ways that COVID-19, with all of its tragic impacts on individuals, families, and communities, appears to be deepening divides in educational opportunity across our nation's classrooms and campuses. Although the pandemic's effects will be studied for many years to come, we know from early studies that for many students, the educational gaps that existed before the pandemic in access, opportunities, achievement, and outcomes are widening. And I'm going to acknowledge that back in March of 2020, we had no choice but to shut down schools. It's what folks did across the world. We knew nothing about this virus. Our state took a lead in September of 2020 in bringing kids back, but obviously it's come with a lot of debate. And so, Deborah, I'm once again going to go to you actually first. As you know, less than 2 weeks ago, a coalition of a dozen local student advocacy groups released a statement expressing their thoughts, concerns, and demands on what safe schools and safe schooling options need to look like right now. Do you mind telling us a little more about those concerns and thoughts and your thoughts on the demands that were made on state officials?
Yeah, so a bunch of like local and students, and there was also some parent organizations in there, went and like kind of surveyed everyone and decided like this is the stuff they needed. And they talked about how there should be a choice if you want to do distance learning or not, that it shouldn't be an entire movement that everyone has to be in person or everyone has to be online, that there should be a strong certain curriculum that sets like the goals to make sure that every student is being aided properly in what they're learning so everyone's on the same page, that we should have project-based assessments instead of going to testing, because if everyone's learning the material differently, it's not fair to give them an assessment that might not help some people. They said this should be better because of the Omicron variant, they're asking us to wear different masks, which is the N95, a KN95, and another one, which I forgot the name. And then those are like expensive and they're not really accessible. So they're saying that schools should provide them for students. They should delay midterms, and this is mainly for high school, and I'll like talk about that later. We should have pass or fail, so it's like easier for your grades, so your grades aren't affected as much. Better quarantine guidelines. I know they released something that said that you'd only have to quarantine for like 5 instead of like 14 days, and just like mental health resources and stuff like that. The biggest one for me that I would agree with is a ventilation system. So I go to classical and we don't have that. And last year when we had to do asynchronous learning, the solution was to put a fan in the window, which is okay in this, like when it was warm, but when it started to get cold, can't really close the window, and it was like really cold because like it's Rhode Island, and we had to like either wear a coat or bring a blanket. And that was like, I know in the winter months, a lot of people did not like come to school. So when they did another distance learning for 11th and 10th graders, and then they took the fans out of the window and they gave us the air purifier, which made it like more bearable to be in class now because like it's not too cold, but we still don't have like an HVAC system, so they can't really like regulate the air. It's also an issue when it's hot because we do not have an AC, so it's like school's literally like you're cooking in there. And I agree with the project-based assessments because like I think Ms. Cox talked about it. My classes too, like my period 1 classes are like the emptiest, and by the time you get to the period 6, maybe kids will come, and it's like there's some people who have not shown up to school. Like I don't even know that they're my classmates, so I can't tell you like if you ask me to name everyone in my class, I unfortunately can't because there are people who have like never showed up, and we'll still have tests, and like the quarter's about to end soon, and some kids who like haven't shown up since November came, and my teacher was going through like list of tests that they need to make up, and we have midterms. They were supposed to start tomorrow, but because it's snowing, they actually got delayed. So they're starting on Friday. So it's like, if you haven't taken the test that you've needed for like the past month or so, you're not going to do well in the midterms. And we're seniors, and it's going to show up on our transcripts, and the colleges need our mid-year reports. So it's just like a whole bunch of issues coming down. And then if you look to why kids are like not coming to school, there's a whole bunch of reasons like that. So I feel like our school should work to like kind of work with the students to be like, this is what you need and this is how we can help you. But it's like there's not a lot of like sometimes they're not teachers even there to like talk to you. Like I know like today literally a teacher got pulled out mid-class because they tested positive for COVID, and it's like they didn't even know that they had COVID to stop the lesson midway. The kids, if you were somebody who just finally showed up to school in 2 weeks and now your teacher's not even here because they're like dealing with the virus, you have nothing to do. And our student council for 12th grade tried to put out a survey to say that we should have a project-based assessments for midterms like we did last year, junior year. And the school said like, no, you guys, like eventually we have to go back to normalcy. So I think a problem with pushing for normalcy is that there's some things from the past that we've noticed that like it worked then, but it's not the best thing to do now. And it's like the problem with pushing for normalcy is that like a lot of people are really scared for midterms now because most of us really like didn't learn. Like I'm lucky because I tried my best to like stay on top of my work. And like I have a 10-week streak with Quizlet. I never had that like ever. But I know like my little brother, he takes algebra 2 and he just distance learning for like half of middle school. He's like really struggling. And like this boy addicted to the Xbox, he's on studying. Like I've never seen him study before. Like it's just like a lot of like problems. So that's like I'm kind of rambling a lot, but like there's like a lot to talk about. And it's like, so I do agree with everything that they're saying. And I think that like what we should have done is just taken a pause, like a 2-week pause, look at all the issues and say, we're going to do X, Y, and Z, because most times it feels like that everyone's trying to play catch up, that like something new will happen and you don't get time to process it. Something else just happened and it just keeps piling on and piling on. And because we all need to go to school and we all need to learn, they can't really like stop school for a year and list out all the systemic issues and try to push to fix it.
Thank you, Deborah. I feel like we could spend the next 45 minutes literally just unpacking what you just shared. And thank you. I know that you're not alone. And I think the push for normalcy, this isn't normal. What we've been through for the last 2 years is not normal. Where we are today is not normal. And anyone who says that like this is the new normal, God forbid. And you're absolutely right that we all need time to process the trauma of what we've been through in the last couple of years. So many Rhode Islanders have lost a family member or a friend. Everyone's life has been turned upside down. Folks have lost jobs. Folks have lost housing. And as you said, you guys have lost, school and big parts of your childhood or teenage years, depending on who you are. And I really appreciate your sharing that. And I think on social media, there's a lot of debate where people take extreme sides on one direction or another. And I appreciate, to use the commissioner's words, the nuance, but there's in what you're saying, kind of sharing that both sides of it. And I'm actually going to go off script a teeny bit and actually go to Ms. Cox next, because I think that your perspective and hers dovetail really importantly together, because the teachers are also not experiencing normal. And the mixed synchronous, asynchronous, or mixed distance learning, in-person learning is not a normal way of teaching. And, granted, I teach here at Brown. We have, university privileged, great AV systems for the most part. And online learning was still unbelievably difficult. And all the more so when you're dealing with kids who may not have Wi-Fi or be able to use their computers, even charge them, and the challenges of trying to do this hybrid. So I would just love to hear kind of your thoughts on this, kind of what teachers on the front lines of education are grappling with around the social and emotional needs, what it actually looks like to manage these very real behavioral health and social and emotional needs of our students, while at the same time trying to protect their academic growth and take care of yourself so that you can keep showing up.
Sorry, they're testing the intercom system in the school, so I might mute midway if they're testing it. There they go.
It's okay. It gives it a flavor of reality. It's all good.
Can you restate the question? Sorry.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So honestly, I'd love to hear about kind of your experience as a teacher in managing this quote unquote new normal, which of course is not normal. How are you managing this balance between synchronous and asynchronous, between half your class being not there and half your class being there? And how are you helping your kids to manage this social, emotional challenge, as well as the academic challenge? And how are you taking care of yourself?
I really want to kind of respond to something Deborah said about kind of changing the way we do assessments. One of the approaches that I've kind of altered in my class is doing more intermittent assessments that are based off of like 3-day chunks. So rather doing the big thing that would really only be assessing the students who have been there. And that's an issue of equity because we don't really know the reasons why students are going in and out or why they're staying at home. And so kind of being very flexible and changing how I approach learning has been a big part of the year, and kind of leveraging my expectations of students, the alters in education and changing of standards and making sure I'm teaching to that, but also responding to the needs. So that's kind of something like this year I've changed a lot. And then in terms of doing those shorter intermittent assessments that aren't necessarily like, sometimes they're a test because students prefer it, but there's always another option for them to show their knowledge in some sort of way. Leveraging hybrid. So I'm at the high school level. So we were hybrid last year, and we were one of the high schools that did go remote for 3 days. How I teach in person versus how I teach hybrid versus how I teach online is they're completely different. I was lucky that in my college experience, I didn't do my undergrad during COVID times, but I had a few courses that were online. So I kind of got to experience the online learning as a student. And I really took that into consideration when I was teaching, like what worked for me. And then I always try to think of it in the student's perspective. For approaching online learning, I always try to make it like we don't know internet access, of like making the assessments like available to do on their own, pre-recording things that but then offering like a live option as well. So it's really about like a lot of balance, which I mean, you might be hearing this and thinking that it's a lot of work. And as a teacher, it is, because we're constantly having to reframe what we're doing either in the moment or the night before or the morning of when we get different emails. And so it's a lot, but I have sort of built that toolbox of resources, things that I've developed and received student feedback to kind of alter things to help them. But I think like listening to students and adjusting to what they need is kind of like the best we can do. But a big difficulty with that is resources. So in answering the question of like responding to their social emotional health, I am one person, I have all my 100 students, and I try to maximize those connections, but at the same time I don't have all the tools in the toolbox to support them. And so having resources in the school of people they can talk to, and then also being there, it's a difficult situation because it is important, but it's like the resources and what we need aren't there at the same time in terms of people in the building and otherwise.
Thank you. Principal Torres, what resources would be helpful? What do you need to support your teachers and your staff as we make up for this year of both lost learning and mental and emotional stress and turmoil for all of us?
I second what Tony just says. As a school, in order to support our students and for teachers to have more tools to address social emotional needs, we applied for a grant with Rhode and the Ruler grant, and we were granted that, and we're working with Yale University, and we're the only school in Providence, so we're very proud of that. And it's in order to give our teachers, our staff, our community, and eventually going into working with our families, giving them those tools on how to deal with situations and how to deal with social emotional things that we are seeing in our students in terms of behaviors, not being attentive, being withdrawn. We see it's a wide variety of social emotional needs that we see within our students. So we're very proud of taking that step on providing our teachers with those tools. So we are rolling that out to our entire community. This year, we have incorporated a guidance counselor. It's half-time into the elementary schools. We did not have that in the past. We did not, and we appreciate that. It would be better if we can have a full-time. So we will work on that and try to get those resources for our students. Like I said before, having those relationships with the teachers, with our families, with our students, it is very important. With our teachers, knowing that we're there and we're doing the work with them. They need to know that going into the classrooms, and we can tell when a teacher needs 5 minutes. And it's okay. They need to know that it's okay, that they can call us and say, right now I need 5 minutes. We'll be there. We'll just do that. It is a hard balance and it is a lot of work in order to meet the needs of all our students. In order to support our families when, like you said, they're having problem with the internet and they cannot access the work. And we need to walk them step by step on how to access Google Classroom, or they forgot, they cannot find something. But also for the families to know that it's okay, that they can reach out to us and that we are going to, and we're going to talk to them. We're all here for the same purpose. For our students, we need to keep reinforcing the fact that it's okay if one day you're sad. We're starting to do what we call our mood meters to see how our students are walking in and determine that what supports they need. We still need more resources in the school to support social, emotional, and academic. We still need to work with interventionists. We still need more personnel to help us reduce this learning gap.
Thank you. From your lips to God's ears. But seriously, I mean, I think it really highlights this need for more resources and the fact that as we make up for what both our students, our families, and our teachers have been through, never mind our administrators have been through, that really there's this theme of there needs to be more support in a wide variety of ways. Melissa, I am going to go to you next, and then I'll move us on to our next topic, which builds right off of this one. Can you tell us a little bit about the PPSD Parent Advisory Board's work, especially as it relates to the impact of COVID over the last 2 years and how you guys are working to support schools and families?
I would love to. So our Parent Advisory Council, this is a group that's been in existence for many, many years and has morphed a little bit since the state intervention in Providence Public Schools. What it is exactly is that there can be representatives from every school in Providence. Typically, these parents, if there's a parent-teacher organization or a PTA or some other parent group, maybe it's a parent or two from that group. Lots of our schools don't have that resource in Providence. And so otherwise it could be other parents that are sort of in the community and talking with principals and teachers at the school and parents, most importantly, and then coming back to this group. We meet monthly. In COVID times, we've been meeting online. Pretty much as soon as schools shut down, we maybe took a month off and then we reconvened. And we meet with representatives from the Family and Community Engagement Office in PPSD, as well as our interim superintendent and Commissioner Infante Green and their staff. We meet with them monthly and talk about what's foremost on parents' minds, what we're hearing within our communities. As we're all saying, we're bringing our individual perspectives here, but many of us, Deborah talks to her peers and other folks at school, and Tony talks to her colleagues, and I'm sure Cynthia coordinates with people in her building. And just like that, this is a space where parents can come together. I think everyone's kind of touched on what parents are concerned about. I'm really glad that you mentioned that joint statement that some of the local community organizations mentioned. PLE was also part of that. And I think that what was clear overall from that statement is that our needs are diverse, that what high school families might need might not be the same as middle school, might not be the same as elementary school. What students and families in one part of the city might not match exactly what other families need in a different part. But there are some universal things. So I think number one are these mental health and social emotional supports. Right now, I'm serving as the PAC's middle school leader. So that means during our monthly Zoom meetings, we break out with just middle school parents to sort of dive a little deeper into what our concerns are. And I think these sort of issues that maybe already existed in our schools, anything that was already a problem has exploded into an even bigger problem. So for middle schoolers, that's a tough time of life. I certainly wouldn't want to repeat it. And I have 2 in my house right now. So I'm watching them do this. And it's a tough time. And I think for many students, because they've lost that time and that even now that we're in this new, hopefully temporary normal, students still don't have the flexibility to have casual social interactions in safe spaces, especially for lots of our families in Providence who might not have access to lots of other outdoor spaces or recreational opportunities. I think that can be compounded here as well. So some of the things that we're seeing in our schools are increased fights among students, even down to the elementary school level. We're seeing students that are acting out. We're seeing students that are skipping class, but then we're also seeing students that are struggling when they're in class. And through my work at my children's school and talking with administrators in our building and teachers, I think what's clear is what Tony touched on this as well, that she's only one teacher. She sees 100 students a day, and she's trying her very, very best to meet all of those kids' needs and identify who needs what. And then folks like Cynthia are trying to like connect the teachers and the students with the help that they need, but everyone is so short-staffed right now. And in Providence in particular, we were already struggling to be at full staffing capacity. And I know that with the takeover that Rhode and the commissioner have made some great strides in that. But as I'm sure you, Dr. Rani, and Dr. Goldberg can respect in your healthcare field, that there is just a staffing shortage everywhere, and that's impacting our students directly. So I think sometimes administrators and other teachers in the building are getting stuck doing things that they're not equipped to do. Every free period is eaten up with covering classes for other educators that are out on quarantine or in isolation. I spoke with an administrator earlier this year that was struggling because she felt that by the time she was trying to sort of help monitor the hallways and interact with students that were struggling in the moment, that by the time the final bell rang, that's when she finally sat at her desk and could start like her real job. And so everyone's just really stressed and exhausted and doing their best. But I think having mental health supports and just more caring humans, preferably with lots of trauma training in our schools, is an absolute necessity as soon as we can get that. And that is absolutely universal from elementary parents, middle school parents, high school parents. Everyone wants and needs this for families.
Thank you. I do want to put a little shout out to all the folks that have been volunteering or have been signing up to be subs, to be substitute paras, to be substitute cafeteria workers. I know that to anyone who is listening who is a member of the Rhode Island community, there are ways to sign up to help with the schools, to help with these acute staffing shortages. And hopefully we can put a link into the chat or into the show notes. Commissioner, maybe you can provide it, or I can try to Google and before the end of the discussion, but I know I have known many folks that have done that. I also really want to acknowledge the comment around violence. We know that obviously rates of violence are increasing across society right now, not just in schools. There is a spillover effect, and the trauma from that compounding the trauma from the last year and a half is tremendous. And so thank you for highlighting that as well. I'm going to move us on. I could talk about this for the whole rest of the period, but our next topic is around mental health and social and emotional learning. And just to warn the panelists, I'm going to move stuff around a little because I know we only have about a half hour left. I am integrating audience Q&As while we go. So I'm not going to do that original plan of 30 minutes at the end for Q&A. Instead, we're going to keep going, but I am going to shorten some of the questions a bit, just so we can get through the rest of the topics. And I think we've touched on this a little. We know that the American Psychological Association reports that 80% of Gen Z teens aged 13 to 17 have experienced more intense stress during the COVID-19 pandemic. There's certainly similar stats out around rates of behavioral problems and mental health stress among elementary school age kids. Our college students are struggling. We're seeing increased emergency department visits for acute behavioral health problems among children and adolescents. And we, of course, have a tremendous shortage, not just of educators, not just of school staff, not just of physicians and nurses and school nurses, but also of mental health, behavioral health specialists. And that's true, not just in our state, but really across the nation. So I want to dive a little bit deeper into this while knowing that we've also talked a lot over the last hour about some of these mental, social, and emotional impacts of the pandemic. I'm going to actually go back to Principal Torres and ask you a little bit about school routines. Any of us that are parents know how important routines are to our kids, to providing structure in their day, to providing them coping mechanisms, a touch point, and helping them to have stability. When schools are closed or when they can't go to school because of COVID, they lose that. And it's particularly acute for those who are already struggling, whether it's with mental health issues, with family dynamics. That loss of access to counselors and support systems can be tremendous. So I'd love to hear from you about how your school has navigated this, and even more so about where you would like to see us go. So I want to start to move us towards kind of what can we do to make things better, or kind of where are our current best practices? How have you navigated this loss of stability for your kids? And where are you alluded to this a little, but where are you hoping to go moving forwards to help adequately support the kids in your school?
Thank you, Ben. Routines are extremely important. It gives our students a sense of security. They know what's coming, and we see it with our young students, our kindergartners, our first graders. We can see it because they didn't have that, that until now. So we do try to do our best to have that sense of them knowing what's coming next. So at the beginning of the year, we did a lot of work on establishing those routines in the classroom, to a point that now they are empowered and they own some of those routines and they're in charge. So we are shifting that ownership to our students. And what we see is in every single classroom that now, when we don't have, maybe the teacher is absent that day and we need to have another person there, the kids are the ones that are saying, oh, we don't do that way. This is how we do it in our classroom. This is how, these are our centers. And I think that is the power that our students need. They need to internalize, yes, I have the power to do this. And having that ownership over what's going on in their classrooms. So that I credit a lot to all of it to our teachers, because they have been the ones that have put all those routines in place. And also they're shifting their learning to our students. We've been through a lot. What we would like to see is for us to get to a more constant and in terms of having our students here, in terms of being getting to the point that we have all the members of our community in our classrooms. Like right now, we're starting a program with Alvarez High School, which is our neighbor high school, and they have a teacher academy. So we are going to start a program with them where their students are going to be able to come to Reservoir Avenue. And they're going to be side by side with their teacher. And we're going to start that training here in their community. Another thing that is important is that our students create relationships with our teachers that are strong relationships. And for them to know that they're cared for here is it's one of our main goals.
It's lovely. And I know in your intro, I mentioned that that is one of your kind of leading philosophies and values, and it shows in the way you describe what you do. Dr. Goldberg, I'm going to go to you next. So we know that all Rhode Island districts are required by law to establish a wellness committee as a subcommittee of our full school board. You co-chair the Health and Wellness Committee, which includes the Social Emotional Health Subcommittee for our Providence Public School District. Can you tell us a little bit, both for those who live within Rhode Island and those attending who may be without, about how these committees are working with local and state leaders to address the mental and social and emotional and physical impact of COVID on our Providence Public School students and families, and any takeaways that you've learned that you think are kind of things that you wish you'd known earlier or stuff for other folks to take back to their own school districts or states?
I think so. As a co-chair of the Health and Wellness Committee, you can imagine we've had a very huge charge over the past 2 years. And I actually was sworn in as a school board member in July of 2020. So it's been a really incredible experience being able to be part of the school board and work with our local and state agencies during this time. But I would say a couple of things that we're doing in Providence that I think are learning points for other districts and entities are that we have a parent university. So one of the initiatives that we've led has been directing parents towards resources that they can access in terms of seeking out jobs, social emotional health, how to get referrals to mental health supports for their children, and really ensuring that our community, our school communities know that we care about the parents as well, we care about the families as well, and they need to know where to get help for their kids. Some other things that have been a huge point of emphasis for us have been doing professional development for teachers in trauma-informed care and how to support children in the classroom with their social emotional health. And then, of course, we have a social emotional curriculum in the schools as well for our children that actually started prior to COVID, but is so much more relevant now. We have a full-time staff member that helps us lead the Health and Wellness Committee that coordinates between the leadership at the district and also coordinates with state agencies. But that has been one of the great learning points for me as a school board member, how challenging it is to make sure that you're both providing and accessing timely information between all of these entities. And I feel very much that we have had two very large charges, leading the COVID response and also at the same time ensuring that our students' needs are met and that we achieve our milestones as a part of the takeover of the state intervention. So what I would say is making sure that social emotional information gets to the students, gets to teachers and staff, and also reaches parents has been a priority for us.
Liz, that's terrific. I hope that becomes available to us across the state and you guys disseminate more widely as well. It sounds like a great resource and a really committed group of parents and community members. For the sake of time, I'm actually going to go to our next topic around COVID's impact on educators. And I will acknowledge that I asked Tony a little bit about this already. As a healthcare worker, I have to say that I think of educators in many ways as being in the same boat as us, that we keep showing up day after day, no matter what. And our mental and physical health, is suffering as we are the ones that are expected to kind of hold up the system. Indeed, we know from national surveys, including one done by the CDC Foundation last May, that almost a third of teachers reported symptoms consistent with clinical depression. Almost 40% reported symptoms consisted with generalized anxiety. And half of teachers said that they were thinking of leaving the profession more now than they were before the pandemic. We've seen the Great Resignation across all parts of society, but the teaching profession has seen it more than other parts. And Rhode Island is not exempt. The Providence School District alone reported that it lost 10% of its teachers last summer and more than 350 over the past 2 years. These are losses of not just people, not just bodies in a system, but folks that are part of a community and who have held roles and have institutional knowledge and who are deeply needed to take care of the kids. Commissioner, I'm actually going to direct this question at you. I'm interested in how Rhode is taking on these staffing shortages. And I think folks have alluded to some of the things that they're doing to care for themselves and for their staff. But ultimately, this is a systems issue of Principal Torres mentioned the training academy that she's doing, which I think is totally terrific. But I would love to think about hear about how you're thinking about addressing both these shortages and also supporting those folks who are there still showing up in the schools, whether teachers, support staff, school nurses, or others.
I can talk both at a PPSD side, but also statewide. So, we're in a tough place, education, but society in general, right? I think that when we were talking about mental health, and the Principal Torres mentioned, for the first time, we put in guidance counselors in elementary schools in Providence, but we couldn't find them. We actually had positions, and that was really hard. We also posted for assistant principals that were never a position in Providence to be able to support, because this is about supporting and being flexible. And for us as a state, hiring gets done at the local level. But one of the things that we did during the pandemic as a state, we played a much larger role. We actually started hiring substitutes, which I think you were talking about earlier. We changed some regulations, some rules, so that we could expedite hiring of staff, and also did much of the training around social emotional for that new staff statewide, and then they went out to the districts, because we have to support the districts, because there really is a shortage across the board. And when you hear the numbers in Providence, but in a place as small as Central Falls, or districts that are smaller, where 5 staff members really impacts the system in a very different way, I'm just worried about all of us. I'm worried about finding nurses in our schools. Like it's just across the board. And this has taken its toll on everyone. So the things that we're trying to do is provide professional development. And I do want to share this. We invested in a course that is free for everyone. We worked with Yale University. It's a 10-hour course on social emotional development. And it cuts across for everyone that touches our students. And I'm happy to say that some of the students that I work with personally have said the impact that it's had when their teachers have utilized it. So that's free right now. And Melissa, after hearing you talk, I think we need to make it accessible to the parents as well, and across the board. But it's not enough, right? It's just not enough. I think that with the COVID dollars, those one-time investments, we are trying to bring in those supports for teachers, because teachers have held it together, and teachers not only have held it together, but have gone above and beyond, and they understand the value of having that connection with students and how difficult it is. But I think there was one question about this shortage that alludes to your first question, which is the disparities, because we really didn't talk about the disparities that were there prior to the pandemic with certain groups of students. We already, for me, I think of COVID as more of a tornado that came in, because we were sweeping these little secrets underneath the rug in education. about who was mostly not being serviced well in our system, provided the best education, and COVID ripped that rug out, and it's all out in public, right? And it is in a place right now where we have to deal with all the things that we have been sweeping under the rug, the social emotional, the economic disparity, the racial disparity. We've seen it all unfold in our society. And what's happening right now is that teachers in the classroom are the burden of all this is where they are, is what we hear from teachers. Like, what else can we do, but what else are we expected to do? It is a really difficult place right now. And for us as a state, is providing professional development and support and making sure that there are places and outlets for teachers and for our administrators and everybody that interacts with our students. And above all, the student voice is the most important voice for us. They helped us develop some of the workshops that we now give to brand new teachers in our state. And that's really important across the board. So I don't have a really good answer other than we're trying very different and varied things, aside from offering a lot of financial incentives to teachers to come teach in Rhode Island, paying teachers for giving their loans, helping them with housing, paying teachers in the sciences, which has always been a shortage area across the nation, and now it's exacerbated, offering them more money. It is, we're trying everything, and we're not opposed to stealing from other states either. Just saying. So we're doing everything in our power, and every single dollar that we get, we're putting it into trying to strengthen our system. It's just that the workforce is low in every single area. And for many of our parents, as we start making these decisions, and I want to go back to Melissa because she was very thoughtful in her comments, is that every community has different needs. And even within one district, the needs of the families are very different. And that means that the needs and the trainings that teachers get has to be different. And that's a place that we need to evolve as a system. And we are doing that at this present moment, or trying to.
Thank you. And I also want to acknowledge, of course, that many teachers and staff members and administrators are parents themselves. And so are dealing with this, not just in the school system where they work, but also with their kids at home. And I know that the quarantine requirements, for example, have been really tough on teachers. And it is a place where test to stay, which has tremendous evidence behind it, can make a big difference. I know we only have about 10 minutes left, and we have a lot of topics we didn't get to. I'm going to go to the last one, which is around assessments. And I'm going to say that I'm actually going to close with Deborah, to the commissioner's point that it's our student voices that need to center us. And Deborah, also recognizing you are only one student, so I don't expect you to hold the burden of all the students in the state on your shoulders. But I do want to kind of close with your thoughts as we get towards the end. I also want to acknowledge that there are a couple of Q&As in there. I've tried to get to many of them. There are a couple which we may not get to around access to good nutrition and dental care. I'll highlight there's a lot of preventive care that is provided in the schools. And we could have a whole nother session on how kids are missing out on that, as well as kind of the role of school nursing. And that's a topic that deeply deserves its own session. But I'm going to ask Kyle, or if you don't mind bringing up the last slide, or Lewis, thank you very much. Talking about our assessments. And I think, Commissioner, this highlights the point that you were saying around the disparities. I want to really kind of say out loud that the learning loss for our children, particularly for those children who were starting a step behind because of either structural or historical inequities, is dramatic. Our RICAS, right, our Rhode Island Comprehensive Assessment System, which is given to students in grades 3 through 8 in English and math, and the SAT, which is of course given to high school juniors and seniors, just demonstrates quantitatively the huge drops that we saw during the pandemic. In English, only 33% of students scored proficient. In math, 20%. Only 2% of English language learners, no, that can't be right. That must be ESL. Yes, we're proficient in math. Only 12% of homeless students were proficient in English. We saw worse stats among those who were special ed, and of course, among students of color, who saw the greatest drops in performance. The data is clear that the last year and a half has hurt our kids, not only emotionally, but also academically. But there's also a lot of debate about these assessments, period. And Deborah, you acknowledge this a little in your comments around the student and parent kind of demands. And so I'd love to close here with you and your thoughts around this very fraught topic of assessments, which, any of us in society know that we have to be able to measure things in order to know when we're making progress. But at the same time, the assessments put enormous pressure on kids that are already experiencing pressure. And so I'd love to hear your thoughts about where, and you said it a little, but kind of where a best possible system could go, and where we can think about, closing with what we can do better to help close these learning losses, and support our kids as we go through the rest of this semester and beyond.
Yeah, it is true that because we're not really learning as much, the way that they're assessing us is not the fairest. And I do think that as a society in whole, we should move away from standard rigid tests that kind of more test of your knowledge of your ability to regurgitate knowledge rather than you've learned it. Because for me, especially in some classes, I will have a perfect A+ in the class, and I couldn't tell you what I'm actually learning in there because because of this nature of school, because I go to a class which is academically competitive, sometimes I have to sacrifice learning the material to just passing the test to get a good grade. Because at the end of the day, colleges, they're just going to see your transcript and they don't know the context behind it. But when we went to doing project-based assessment, I realized that when you're doing a project and it's instead of having maximum 50, 60 minutes to take the test and you have a week to do a project, you really need to know what you are learning and know it in a way to properly present it. So I think that if we start to move away, because I know in elementary school, obviously you need to have tests, because if you finish kindergarten and you can't read, you're gonna have a problem in the future. But when we get to the high school level, I think doing project-based assessments and learning to know your concepts rather than just being able to say simple information would be really necessary. And with midterms, unfortunately, even though we try to argue against it, we're still going to have the standard 2-hour midterm on subjects. And we got a little lucky because it snowed, so climate change slowed down for a little bit. So we got lucky that it snowed, so we get Friday, and then we have a weekend to study, and then we have the rest of the midterms in this week. So I think the one thing that we can do immediately is that whenever we're gonna have tests, some of my teachers do this, is that the day before they test, they kind of go over everything that will be on the test, which really helps you, because now if you just intook a lot of information in 2 weeks, you now know what you really need to focus on to pass the test. And having questions that are not too straightforward, that have concept-based short answer questions, so that you have more time to explain yourself. And you can also get partial credit, because a multiple choice question, if the answer is D and you put A, it's wrong. But if you have a short answer, your teacher can see where you are understanding and what you don't understand, and think of ways to help you through that. And also going over tests after we take them, so then you know what you know and what you don't know.
I love that. It sounds like great teaching. So as an ideal, Deborah, thank you. I'm going to open it up. We have only a couple of minutes left, but for any of the panelists, I would welcome your kind of final thoughts. Obviously, none of us can predict what tomorrow is going to bring, let alone weeks or months down the line, but would welcome your thoughts, kind of final takeaways on what you want the listeners to hear, and where you're hoping that things are going to go in the days and weeks to come. Feel free to unmute yourself, but I'm actually, go ahead, Commissioner.
Yeah, I just want to end with that I feel very hopeful for Rhode Island. I think when other states have struggled in certain areas, we have pulled together as a community. Nothing's perfect, and none of this is where we want to be. But I think as Rhode Islanders, we've forged ahead in the best interest of our students and families. And I am extremely grateful to be part of that work and energy. And, our state motto fits us well right now.
Hope indeed.
I also wanted to say something about the future of COVID in schools, and that is that I can imagine a world in a couple of weeks, in 4 to 6 weeks, where Omicron has already peaked, where we've already seen the hospitalizations that have resulted from this huge case surge, and where we see us coming together more as a community, where we have higher rates of vaccination among our students and staff, and where we can start to see more families gathering inside schools, where we can see parent volunteers in schools, where we can see kids coming together and building those friendships that they haven't necessarily had the opportunity to build much. But we've learned a lot in the last 3 school years that we've had COVID, and we have so many more strategies now to forge forward. And I think I can really imagine a world where we go back to much more of the socialization and community that we had before. And I think it really is around the corner. So I want to thank all the people that have come together. I've seen really exceptional effort by teachers and students and parents, and kind of like holding it together and making it through these really tough 3 school years. But I'm optimistic about what our future will bring, and I think it will bring a lot more community.
Thank you.
I think that we need to be proud of the work that we've done. And I also see ourselves growing. We have grown a lot together, but keep working towards have a more equitable education for all our students. So I am very grateful for our school nurse overall, first, our teachers and our parents and our students. I think that we know we have learned a lot about ourselves, about our resilience as a community, and as learners. We all are learning, and our flexibility most of all. So that's why I say I think that there's a lot of hope ahead for our students.
Thank you. Here's to civility also. Melissa, Tony, and then Deborah, I'll close.
I just want to thank you all again for allowing me to be part of this panel and to speak with you guys tonight. And just once again, I'm just one parent, but we all need something different, but we all need the same thing. We all want to feel safe. We all want to feel that our students are seen and heard and cared for at school. And I think I speak for all parents when I say that we're so grateful for principals like Principal Torres, for fellow students like Deborah, for teachers like Tony, and for the administrators like our commissioner and Dr. Goldberg on the school board. Just we have to try to work together, and I truly believe in the goodness of people, that we all, even when our perspectives are really different and we have very different ideas of what the best course might be in the short term or even the long term, that we all have something to share with one another. And I think centering student voice, community voice, and parent voice can go a long way to making sure that every individual community's needs get met.
Thank you, Melissa. And thank you for your leadership with the parents as well, and your ability to create community there. Tony?
I just really value all the perspectives that were shared today, because I think we all end up being in a situation where we feel alone or drowned in the work that we have to do, and the list goes on, and it feels as if, the changes we make or the discussions we have go nowhere. So it's always good to hear other perspectives. And I just really do want to thank Deborah, because valuing student voice in all this is especially just extremely valuable. And I think it needs to happen more. So I just really appreciate everybody that was on here, and especially Deborah for talking about her experience in school this year.
Thank you. Go
Sorry.
ahead, Deborah.
Thank you. I really like this panel and like hearing different perspectives, because like from my perspective, the main I would know is just teachers, because I talk to my teachers the most, but I didn't know what it was like on an administrator level, or like when you're like the commissioner of education. And I think that we just need more of these like panels that combine like more people to talk, because I feel like if we all talk and try to find a common ground, it would be easier to navigate everything.
Thank you. Well, on that note, a huge thank you to our organizers, particularly Soul Jane and Karen, our media services, the Annenberg Institute, and of course, the School of Public Health. I know we didn't talk a lot today about the science. We talked much more again about kind of community and equity and how to move us forward in terms of our academic, social, and emotional learning. And I'm so grateful to each of you on this panel for your leadership as individuals and as part of the larger community. And I look forward to us building a stronger and more healthy educational system for our kids, no matter who they are or where they come from. Thank you. And I hope you all have a wonderful night and stay healthy. Thank you, Soul Jane.
Thank you, everyone. It's been a pleasure to listen to you all and impart your knowledge. Have a wonderful evening.